What's up, everybody? DDay back again with another video for DDay Gaming. And today I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the recent news from Nintendo that the Switch will not in fact have virtual console support the day that it launches, which is this Friday. Is that a huge deal? Does that really matter? Is it going to hurt sales? That's the type of stuff that we're going to talk about today. So if you're into that sort of thing, stick around and I'll see you after the break. Okay, so I figured I should probably start this video out by pointing out the fact that we find ourselves in a situation that seems quite familiar, and that is that we've got a console launching, and it has been nothing but great news coming out of the console manufacturer until right about a week or two before it launches, and that's where some of the less than stellar news starts slowly but surely leaking out in a controlled fashion. Now, this is not unique to Nintendo. This has happened many times before. Certainly not all console launches, but quite a few of them over the previous generations that I can think of. And why does this keep happening? I don't know. It seems as though it's a tried and true formula, so perhaps it works on some level, and that's why this keeps happening. You know, you'd think that in a perfect world, you'd get all of the bad news out of the way up front, and then it would be smooth sailing from there, right? But that's just not how things typically go. And there may be reasons for that. I don't know. You know, it's entirely possible that some things you don't know that things are going to go south until much closer to launch. Maybe you had a feature that you promised was going to be available on day one, and then a few weeks before that day one system update has got to be made available, you have to make the hard call that it's not ready in time, and then you kind of need to back down from that promise that you made. I'm sure that that sort of thing happens sometimes. It's just curious to me that this just is so frequently the case. You know, there's that little pessimistic part of me that wonders if the reason that this keeps happening is because if you just let all of the good news flow for months leading up to launch, and then at the last minute sneak in those few little less than perfect bits of information. Perhaps some people that don't follow the news about your console launch super closely are not going to hear about it, right? And so that's not going to influence their buying decision. And then other people are just so enamored with the idea of the new console that even if they do hear about it, they're not going to let that sway them. Perhaps they've already got their pre-orders paid off, they've already got the money allocated, and yeah, it's kind of a bummer, but you're just super excited for the thing. You know, perhaps there's a psychological element to this. I don't know. But here we are again, repeating this same cycle where the last week or two leading up to the Switch, we're starting to get those little bits of information leaking out. Not even really leaking out. This information is being parsed out very deliberately and spread out with a lot of care. And the latest, greatest bit of less than super awesome information about the Switch is that it's not going to launch with the Virtual Console. Now, is that a huge deal? Probably not. Probably not. Remember that not having the Virtual Console on day one doesn't necessarily mean that there's not going to be Virtual Console support on the thing at all. And, you know, perhaps they were having some challenges getting everything working, and what we would have gotten if they rushed it out to market was going to be a subpar experience, right? It very well could be. Then on top of that, let's not ignore the fact that Nintendo never actually said that there was going to be Virtual Console support on this. So since they never announced that as a feature, not once, why in the world did they feel the need to risk damaging the Switch's reputation with a subsection of their potential customer base by at the last minute pointing out that something they never said was going to be there isn't going to be there? Why would they do that, right? That's very telling to me, and I find it very interesting. I suspect that on some level, Nintendo has their pulse on the news outlets and social media and things like that enough to know that one of the more compelling things about the Switch for a lot of people is not necessarily just going to be the new games designed for the Switch. It's going to be the capability to play a lot of Nintendo's back catalog from systems past on the go. Now, that's not to say that there haven't been some instances of that on, say, for instance, the 3DS. Of course there have, right? But the 3DS's kind of power level in the grand scheme of things kind of kept it from being able to play games on some of the Nintendo home consoles, right? I mean, remember, you've got to have a new Nintendo 3DS to even have access to Super Nintendo games, right? But the Switch is obviously an infinitely more capable device. So I'm beginning to think that Nintendo is very much aware of the fact that most of us are expecting virtual console support. In fact, it's a very compelling reason. I've read a lot of articles and I've talked to a lot of people that have basically said something to the extent of, yeah, I'm excited for some of the new Switch games, and that certainly, but the thing that's really got me salivating is the thought of being able to play, say, GameCube games and a broader subsection of the Super Nintendo library and maybe N64 games on the go. Certainly you've been able to do some of that in a portable fashion in the past, but remember, to even play Super Nintendo games, you had to have the new Nintendo 3DS. That functionality wasn't available to the older 3DS. It just doesn't seem to be enough horsepower available to emulate the home consoles of yesterday, right? But the Switch very clearly is quite a bit more capable device than the 3DS, and so naturally one would assume that we would get access to a larger portion of the Super Nintendo back catalog, possibly even the Nintendo 64, maybe even the GameCube, right? There were a lot of rumors floating around about that. And so I find it very, very interesting, very, very telling even, that Nintendo would risk upsetting some of its customer base by making sure to clarify that that's not going to be there on day one. It means that they knew that we desperately wanted it, even though they never announced that as a feature. And that's a positive thing for me. You know, Nintendo in the past has been accused of being a bit tone deaf, kind of a little bit unaware of what's going on in, you know, in their own little bubble, in their own little world, right? And, you know, them making this announcement makes me feel a little bit better about the fact that perhaps they're taking, you know, they're sticking their toe outside of the bubble, right? They're paying attention to that sort of thing. Nintendo has made a lot of moves recently that have made me feel as though we're not dealing with the same old Nintendo in a good way, right? And honestly, this is one of them. Is it a bummer to find out that that's not going to be available on day one? Yeah, sure. Just like everybody else, you know, I read the rumors. I was excited about the possibility of playing GameCube games on the go, and there's nothing to say that that's still not going to happen at some point, right? Maybe not, though. Again, Nintendo hasn't actually announced that as a feature. Some folks, I think, have pointed out that the NES Classic, for instance, in its own little way is kind of like a little closed virtual console with all those little Nintendo games at a great price and all of that. And I think a lot of us are wondering if this coming holiday season we might not see a Super NES Classic, right? That might be a thing. And one could argue that perhaps as Nintendo has made a bunch of changes over the past year or so in how they do things, maybe there's not going to be a virtual console, right? Maybe they're just going to sell these little standalone boxes with a predefined number of games on them, and that's going to be the best that we get. Do I think that's what's going to happen? No. I think that those live on as their own separate little devices. I don't think that those are going to have any impact on the virtual console whatsoever, but I have seen that fear raised, and yeah, I can see some merit in it. I just don't think that's necessarily what's going to happen. So does it matter that the Nintendo Switch is not going to have the virtual console on day one? Obviously Nintendo thinks so, otherwise they wouldn't have gone out of their way to make sure that we knew that it wasn't going to be there, right? But how much does it matter? I suspect not a whole lot. Honestly, I'm still very, very hopeful, as I'm sure many of you are, that that functionality will come later. And honestly, I'd rather have it when it's ready. I'd rather have it when it's done. I'm going to be quite busy with Zelda Breath of the Wild for, I would suspect, quite a while. So if they need an extra bit of time to go ahead and get that perfected, that is just fine by me. And although not necessarily directly connected, remember that this online service from Nintendo is supposed to be free at launch, right? And then later on this fall, it's supposed to become a paid service. And Nintendo had mentioned the whole thing with the Nintendo or Super Nintendo games that you'd be able to download and kind of borrow and play for a month, and then they'd disappear. Obviously, those would be virtual console type games. So I'm wondering if this announcement about virtual console not being there on day one also indirectly confirms that we're not going to have those free games available as part of the Nintendo online service for the Switch until the point at which it becomes paid. And that's not to say that those two things are necessarily tied together, but it does strike me like, because those Super Nintendo or Nintendo games would probably be part of the virtual console, that if virtual console is not there on day one on the Switch, those probably won't be either, right? I could be wrong about that, certainly. But, that may also point to perhaps a date when the virtual console would be available. Maybe that's the target, to have that ready in time for the paid version of the online service to be available, because it'll be a required component of that. But at this point, I'm just speculating, just a random thought that just occurred to me. But in any event, am I bummed that we're not going to have virtual console support on day one? Yeah, absolutely. I wanted it as much as I'm sure many of you did. Because again, Nintendo has got this wonderful back catalog of games, and there are quite a few of those that have never officially been supported on the go. And I do think that, again, that is a very, very compelling reason for a lot of people to pick up a Nintendo Switch. Just the nostalgia factor added in with the new capability of taking these games on the go. I think that's going to be great for them. So hopefully we are going to see that happen sooner rather than later. At the end of the day, in the grand scheme of things, I'm sure that Nintendo will weather this. Again, this is not a feature they actually ever promised, right? I'm sure it will come eventually, and I cannot wait for that day. But anyway, this is probably as good a place as any to go ahead and wrap this video up. Honestly, I could spend hours and hours talking about just how cool the virtual console could be on the Nintendo Switch. Honestly, I could spend hours and hours talking about how excited I am and how awesome I think the virtual console and some of the cool games that I'd love to see on it will be on the Nintendo Switch if and when it becomes available. But perhaps we should save that for some future videos. So just wanted to say, thanks for watching if you've made it this far in the video. I really appreciate it. Wanted to give a special shout out to my subscribers. You guys rock. And if you're watching this video and you haven't subscribed to my channel, maybe poke around, check out some of the other videos. And if my particular brand of rambling is your thing, maybe consider subscribing. It is totally free for you, and it helps me out quite a bit. Plus, also makes my day, which is awesome. So if you want to find me other places on the internet, you can follow me on Twitter at that DDay guy. And I also stream games. I've been doing some Halo Wars lately for some reason on both YouTube and Twitch. It's the same content in both places. Honestly, just whatever your platform of choice is. So for YouTube, you've already found me. If you don't want to lose me, make sure to click that subscribe button. Shameless plug, right? And my username for Twitch is DDay on Twitch. So once again, everybody, just wanted to say thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next one.